Welcome back to Grassroots Radio Colorado. You are listening to Andy and Corey Pate from the Party of Choice. We're sitting in tonight for Chris Cook. She's taking a very well-deserved night off. And we are talking to Mark Mathis, of the producer of the movie Spoiled. And Mark, Corey has some questions for you.
Yeah, well, before we start talking about your new project, which is called Fractured, could you just go over with us real quick what you expect to see happening with the oil prices? Because they're not going to stay low forever. And then what do you think we should do about it as a country?
Well, over the next 6-8 months, I think the prices are going to stay pretty close to where they are now, except there's a wild card out there that most people don't think about, even energy analysts that I read. The low price of oil is having a severe effect on dictatorships around the world. So you've got Iran, you've got Venezuela, and most importantly, Russia. They're all in big trouble right now, and other oil exporting nations as well, because they need $100 a barrel oil, or in some cases even more, such as the case in Venezuela, in order to meet their budgets. So their economies are really struggling. They're having a very difficult time even running their countries.
Well, really quick, Mark, I was wondering about that. My goodness, they totally rely on oil. I mean, they totally rely on their exports. I was thinking those places have to be turning into powder kegs.
Oh, yes. It's really, for most of these countries, it's all they have. So if you look at the most critical pressure point right now is Russia. If you've noticed in the last couple of weeks, you've seen an increased activity, violence, killing in Ukraine. And I believe the reason for that is that Russia is under so much economic pressure right now that they're trying to create trouble in Ukraine, maybe carve off some more territory for themselves, create some international pressure, which then creates some anxiety and instability in the market, and with that will come it'll artificially pump up the price of oil, which will then help their economy. So I think that Vladimir Putin is trying to stir up trouble in Ukraine with the hope of doing that. It's been small measures up to this point, but they've really ramped up the shelling and the killing in Ukraine over the last couple of weeks. If we don't see higher oil prices within the next few months, I think he's going to continue to ramp that up until prices come up. But like I said, this is a wild card. We don't really know how long these nations can suffer under this economic pressure before something crazy happens or one of these societies implodes, which is likely to happen in Venezuela.
So you're saying all this stuff is happening around the world, but the genesis of it, not the genesis, but one of the genesises of it, is the fracking boom in the United States. It kind of affected the entire thing, didn't it?
Yes, it's to my view, it is the biggest thing that happened. As we mentioned in the previous part of the show, that the slowdown of the Chinese economy is probably the second biggest thing. But those two things together have contributed to an oversupply and really reduced demand.
Okay, well, it's going to be fascinating to watch and see what happens over the next year or so. So I've heard that you're going to be working on a new film called Fractured. Can you tell us more about that and what that's going to be go over?
Yeah, I continue to be fascinated by oil and natural gas, coal, energy in general, and I noticed something along the way as I was taking Spoiled around the country, and it had to do with language. Fractured is really going to be about the intersection of language and energy, and how we, as a society, completely misunderstand the importance of these resources to our lives. Our thinking, our knowledge about these resources is highly fractured. And of course, the reason that I picked Fractured is that that's a play with the biggest piece of the technical side of the film, which is hydraulic fracturing.
Sure.
And how important that was. Andy's referenced that a couple of times. In my view, single-handedly saved the United States from dropping into not just a deeper recession, but actually a depression.
Well,
we would have pulled the entire world down with us.
One thing that really gets me, we have here in Colorado people who try to oppose fracking, and they have these, advanced anti-fracking legislation and stuff. You'll notice that in a place where they know not only the benefits of it, but the low risks of it, like North Dakota, nobody's advancing any of that.
No, they're not. And one of the more interesting places is Denton, Texas. If you follow this sort of thing, then that's a big one, because this is a town that's not far outside of Dallas. So you think, well, how could a community, a city, pass a fracturing ban in a place in the heart of Texas, which happened last November? But an interesting thing, when you look at the analysis of the how people voted, the part of town, the area where you had the most fracturing activity, oil and gas development, the voters there actually voted in a majority that they did not want a ban. They're the ones who are actually impacted most, and there are impacts. You've got truck traffic, you've got industrial activity that's taking place fairly near residential areas. So there are certainly impacts, noise, dust, all that sort of thing. But yet these people voted in the majority to keep it, whereas the other side of town, and you've got a university there, where people are voting who are not as nearly as impacted, they voted against it. So it's really has less to do with the activity or oil and gas development than it does with an ideological position.
Well, one thing I've noticed is that whenever it comes up with these political ballot initiatives, whatever it is, and they're talking about fracking, it seems like they're really misusing the word a lot. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, there's general ignorance about what hydraulic fracturing is and does, and the groups and the people that protest hydraulic fracturing, they're really protesting oil and gas development.
Right. It's all drilling from what I've seen.
It's a protest against drilling, because when you look at what the EPA, which is certainly no friend of the oil and gas industry, and the head of the EPA has said, there's not a single case where we can demonstrate that hydraulic fracturing has polluted groundwater. Yet that's the biggest mantra that is out there when it comes to, we've got to ban this activity because we're worried about our water. Well, the reason they say that is that they know that people have a deep emotional connection to their water. They know how essential that is to life. And so that's the drum that they beat, but the evidence is not there. And as a matter of fact, study after study after study has demonstrated that hydraulic fracturing has not, as far as we can tell, caused any groundwater pollution, and that's saying quite a bit when you consider the millions of wells that have been drilled in the country.
I've got to ask you a question, because you're talking about the EPA and all the restrictions and how much it has restricted fracking, which it has.
Yep.
Hypothetically, what if I could wave my magic wand and the EPA, not was gone, but the EPA started actually working with business? What would happen if we actually unleashed fracking and unleashed it on public lands, opened up a lot more lands, because I believe we do it much more cleanly and safely than they do it overseas? What would happen to our economy? What do you think?
I think, our economy would absolutely ignite. We would see cash flows into the federal treasury and economic activity and job creation like we haven't seen in quite some time. It's a difficult thing to predict, because when you look at the oil market, okay, you've got hydraulic fracturing producing oil, but it's more costly than what it takes to produce oil in nations like Saudi Arabia and Iran. So I don't know for sure exactly. I mean, nobody would how it would play out, because if you flood the market, you're going to have lower prices, and then you're going to have less activity. So I think I'm unequivocal in saying that the combination of horizontal drilling and the hydraulic fracturing has absolutely saved the U.S. economy, and I hope that it continues and even accelerates. But how that plays out with other oil producers across the world and the world demand for oil, I don't know if I'm.
Sounds like it's a bit of a balancing act there. You don't want too much of one or too much of another.
Well, I'm more concerned about us than the world anyway, because honestly, we have a government that seems to be more concerned about the world than us. So I really like what you're telling us about how this would affect us.
Yeah. Well, so Mark, tell me, we're coming up on a break here, but thank you so much for coming on the show with us tonight. So what is the most exciting thing about your upcoming film, Fractured, that you want listeners to know about?
Well, that we're going to shock people when they find out that virtually every word, phrase, or term that we use to describe our energy use is wrong.
Okay. That's a really, that's a big claim, everything.
It sounds crazy, but actually it's true. And we're gonna blow that up and explain to people why we're so misinformed, and language is such a big part of the reason why.
Mark Mathis, thank you so much for coming on tonight. I can't tell you how excited I was when I heard that you were going to be coming on. Folks, you need to see Spoiled if you can.
Mark, how do they get a hold of you if they want to get a copy of Spoiled or learn more about Fractured? What's the best way for them to reach you?
Well, right now the best place to go is spoiledthemovie.com. That's where we've got all of our Spoiled stuff. We're still working on piecing together some of our marketing materials for Fractured, but when that is available, then it'll be the same as Spoiled. It'll be fracturedthemovie.com.
Well, we're looking forward to it, and we hope you come back to Denver and that we can play a part of that.
When Fractured comes out, I will definitely be in Denver.
Yay! Well, we're looking forward to it.
Look forward to seeing you, Mark. Thank you so much. Folks, you are listening to Grassroots Radio Colorado. This is Andy and Corey Pate. When we come back from the break, we're going to talk a little more about oil, but we're definitely going to start talking about 2016.